you've got modern progressive Christians who are buying into crystals and crystal healing, and they've turned God into such a, hey, it's just love and it's you. You know, you're not doing anything. Here's the thing. If there is a God, that God either cares about who you sleep with or he doesn't. If he does, we should know, because that's important. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. As some of you know, the majority of my content on this channel is funded by patrons at patreon.com/atheistdebates. But all of the content is available for free to all of you. If you're able to become a patron, I appreciate the support. But this clip is not patron supported. It's from a call we took recently on the line. I'll be posting more clips like this, probably with this intro attached to all of them, especially as we near 200,000 subscribers here. So whether you're a patron, a YouTube subscriber, or just someone who views and comments, likes, and subscribes, thank you and enjoy. All right, here we go. Let's try this again. We've got Clay about the progressive view of God. Go ahead, Clay.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I was having some technical difficulties. So
so were we.
I am having, maybe this was divine intervention that my call couldn't get connected so many times, who knows. I am a recently turned atheist, was a Southern Baptist for all of my life. I'm 30 years old now. And one of the things that I find in conversations with my family members and friends, people that, I grew up kind of all believing the same thing, is there seems to be a hesitation of adopting a progressive view of God that is, loving to gay people, that, isn't okay with the slavery that we see in the Old Testament. And then there's another form, some people do a deconstruction, in their later years, and they deconstruct from fundamentalism to a more progressive view of God. As somebody that, deconstructed specifically from a fundamental view, it is interesting because it seems like at a certain point, once you start adopting more progressive views, it almost feels like you're talking about a completely different entity. So in your view, Jim and Matt, what do you guys think is the line, pun intended, about where, the progressive view of God winds up talking about something that is completely outside of what Christianity sees from the Bible?
When you say Christianity sees from the Bible, there's 1,000 different denominations, sub-denominations, and everything else. I don't know that there is such a thing as a single Christianity view of the Bible that makes any sense. I think the more liberal you are in your beliefs, the closer you are to atheism. But that is just because you start running into serious problems that Bass pointed out on many, many occasions when you start ignoring parts of the Bible because you don't like them. So if you think that slavery is wrong and the Bible doesn't support slavery, you've got a lot of verses to deal with that tell you otherwise, and absolute silence from Jesus Christ on the issue. And you have Paul sending slaves back as slaves and their Christian brother. So you've got some reconciling there to do. So I think it's good that we have more liberal churches. And I think it's a step along the way. It's a step in recognizing that maybe the Bible isn't full of good stuff like people think, but there's some serious problematic stuff there too as well.
I think we're seeing a little bit of syncretism again, in that, in the same way that Christianity adopted and merged and blended with other religious ideas, not just religions, but just religious ideas in general. I think you're seeing that again. And what you're seeing is a lot of New Age, which the amazing Randy called Newage, and because it rhymes with sewage, and I completely agree with him and miss him terribly. But these, you've got modern progressive Christians who are buying into crystals and crystal healing, and they've turned God into such a, hey, it's just love and it's you, and you're not doing anything. Here's the thing. If there is a God, that God either cares about who you sleep with or he doesn't. If he does, we should know, because that's important. If God cares for us to know what he wants, what he thinks. But so there's the first problem. Does God want us to know what he thinks about things, what his expectations are, what his requirements are, where he is on morality? If the answer is no, then every conversation that we end up having about God's or God is useless. But if the answer is yes, then the onus is on God to make that information clear. And so if God wants us to know that gay sex is wrong or gay sex is okay, God's the one that needs to make that clear. And it hasn't happened, which means either God doesn't care, doesn't want us to know, or doesn't feel like engaging on that subject. But if God does care and hasn't engaged on the subject, that's God's fault, not ours. And because it hasn't happened, this leads everything open to these hippy dippy, ooh, God loves all the queers, churches. That bishop, as much as I applaud her for being great and doing the right thing under the right circumstances, if I threw on my Southern Baptist hat, well, Clay, you used to be a Southern Baptist. What would you have thought of that bishop as a Southern Baptist?
It's very easy for me to tap back into the mindset because it was so recent, and I am appalled to say that I would have also been on Donald Trump's side in his response. That
exactly.
And there's a lot of people defending the backlash from the sermon by saying, as soon as you start accepting, anything from the alphabet, in reference to LGBTQ issues, as soon as you start referencing that or, affirming that from the pulpit, you're no longer talking about a church of God, and just completely dismissing any sort of divine, authority that a bishop might have as somebody that has dedicated their life because they're preaching something they don't believe in. And it's just, it is baffling now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. What I'm saying is, if we take that view, our old Southern Baptist view, and compare it with the gay-friendly church that she's a part of, only one of those two views can be consistent with the mind of God, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If only one of those views can be consistent with the mind of God, that means one of those churches is wrong. How do we tell which one's wrong? If not both, I mean, they could both be wrong, but how do we tell which one's wrong? Can we just use our own opinion? Like, Clay, do you think gay sex is okay or not?
I think it's fine.
Cool. Me too. But that's just like our opinion. If my friend down the street thinks gay sex is immoral and against God, how do we deal with that? How do we tell who's right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't remember who said this specifically, but there was the analogy of, if you lead 6 blind men to an elephant and have them feel, a certain spot, then they're all going to come away with different conclusions as to what the elephant is. And the analogy, and
that wouldn't be a terrible analogy if it were actually accurate, because the elephant is the creator of the universe who has thoughts that he's not conveying and is decided to be felt up by a bunch of blind guys instead of engaging with humanity as it is. So that analogy falls completely apart.
Well, and the blind guys aren't actually experiencing. The blind guys aren't experiencing the entire elephant, and they're choosing not to. There's no part of an elephant you can touch that you can't figure out there's more to the elephant than just what you're touching. So the blind guys are also being deliberately ignorant of the rest of the elephant.
There's also a response to that. That is that same analogy of blind men feeling up an elephant. Somebody would say, in the sense of religion, it's also like saying looking for a black cat in a dark room. But religion's actually worse than that, because it's like looking for a non-existent cat in a dark room and finding it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the other big rebuttal that I've used for the elephant analogy is that it's a fine analogy and it sounds good until you really kind of start scrutinizing it, as we've said. And one of the big things is if you can come to different conclusions that are at its core mutually exclusive to each other and deny the other person's conclusions, then you need to then reassess and be like, okay, well, my conclusion is obviously not correct because we can't all have completely different mutually exclusive conclusions. And again, I think that's where it sort of gets into the tricky part, is because I have a family member that, they deconstructed from their kind of Southern Baptist roots, just like I did, but they reconstructed under a much more progressive view of God. And from a cultural standpoint, a social standpoint, we very much see eye to eye on a lot of things. And they do a lot of really great work in their church for the community that is not strictly evangelism. It's not like, hey, we need to go spread the love of Jesus or, tell people about Jesus so their souls can be saved. It is actually just like there's people that are in need that we need to take care of, and that's great. But when I start having conversations with them about kind of the more rational backing up of their beliefs, it usually comes down to just a matter of feelings. Oh, I feel like God is this. I feel like God doesn't have hell. I feel like God is going to send everybody to heaven, and maybe annihilationism. And it winds up being so far gone from the biblical texts that it winds up feeling like we're now talking about a different deed.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting because I want to have these conversations, with my more progressive Christian friends and kind of feel this out with them. But I have the benefit of being able to sort of steelman the more fundamentalist side of things and try to argue against that. And again, it winds up being one of those things where if it comes down to that's how you feel and you don't have any sort of real rationality to back it up, that's great. You can do that, I guess. It's not the way I would recommend, finding the core structure of your beliefs, but if that's how you want to frame your view of the world, then I guess there's worse ways to do it, especially if on the same token, you are adopting a more progressive view of Christianity that promotes not doing the same sort of harm that more fundamental Christianity has had the history of doing.
Well, I think when you talk about doing harm, I would like to point out that trying to make good decisions on bad data is harmful in and of itself because you can't get there, right? Mm-hmm. You can't be right accidentally, right? Mm-hmm. And that's problematic. But yeah. Well, thanks for the call, and I'm glad you called back a second or third time is the case. Well, third time, I guess, at this point for everybody, because we lost a call in the studio there. But
well, and I was listening to the call from Ash, and that's sort of what prompted me, is because as much as I respect, Ash's, stance and that sort of stuff, listening to her argument, it did seem to sort of fall in line to more of the progressive Christianity that I am now kind of in the middle of trying to talk through with my family members. And it is a very interesting, it's almost a complete, about face with a lot of the more Southern Baptist roots that I was raised in, because now you're not really talking, now people are not interested in defending the actual historicity of the Old Testament. Now people are not as ardent of a defender of, Jesus being actually God. There's a lot more things that you can grant or say, okay, well, that's open for interpretation. The apocalyptic Jews of the time would have had a much different view of these texts. And I think there's room for that in still being able to believe in God. But again, at a certain point, you have to sort of take a step back and say, okay, well, do I actually have any rationalized justifications for believing in what I say I believe, especially when it has, such big ramifications on your supposed eternal identity?
Yeah. I mean, literally, I almost interrupted you to ask the very thing that you got to, which is, you phrased it in the way that a lot of theists do when they're struggling with the burden of proof, which is, does this still leave room for me to believe in God? That's the wrong question. There's always room for you to believe in God as long as you sacrifice being rational, as long as you don't care about evidence, as long as you prefer comfort over truth and other things. Instead of looking for, does this leave room for God? The only thing we should care about is there sufficient evidence to warrant believing that this God is real? And if there's not, then the only rational position is to not believe until such time as that changes. People tend to think that atheism is the assertion that there are no gods and absolute certainty that there are no gods and nothing could ever change my mind. And that's not it at all. It is, theism is claiming there's a God, and atheism is saying, I'm not convinced, or in some cases, I'm convinced you're wrong. And depending on the definitions, I think it's obvious that some people are wrong. We at least know that everybody who makes claims about God cannot be correct because some of those claims are conflicting.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't even get through the conflicting claims to figure out who's more likely to be correct, we're stuck. And if we can't begin by saying, here's the good reason to believe in some kind of God, and then narrow down from there, we're also stuck. And that's why I think I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm new to this compared to, Dan Barker's been arguing this stuff since I was a fundamentalist Christian going to the First Baptist Church of Harvester in St. Charles, Missouri. And I have other friends in the community who've been doing this since I walked down the aisle at the age of 5 at Gashland Baptist Church in Gladstone, Missouri. And all of those people are still new when you go back to, Voltaire and David Hume, and, then get back to the actual discussions that are potentially about the apostles, but not necessarily with the apostles, as if having a firsthand testimony would be sufficient to confirm a God. You could confirm some of the events that happened, but how would you confirm a resurrection? How would you confirm the loaves and fishes? How would you confirm water to wine? A mere reporting of these events can never be sufficient. And if there's a God, that God should know and understand the best epistemology and what our limitations and understanding of epistemology is, and should be able to provide answers to these things in a way that is justified to us. And that never happens.
Well, it's funny too, because, in the whole atheist YouTube sphere, there's been a recent kerfuffle with Alex O'Connor and Wes Huff. And I was not really familiar with, with any of the claims of, the eyewitness testimonies of Joseph Smith and Mormonism and any of that sort of stuff, just because I'm not familiar with Mormonism. But in researching it and, watching Alex's video, in researching how many eyewitness testimonies we have in regards to the angel Moroni handing the tablets to Joseph Smith, the nature of those claims in regards to the same sort of evidence that people use as sufficient proof in their minds to believe that the Bible exists, it's just like, okay, well then why do you dismiss Mormonism? Why do you just, if you're wanting to go to the textual accuracies of a word for word, alignment of the scriptures, the oldest scriptures that we can find, then how come we can't do that with the Quran? Because there's great evidence for that, and it's just it winds up feeling like a confirmation bias that oh well, I believe it, and there must be evidence for it, so let me find the evidence to then confirm the thing I already believe. It's just circular.
Okay. I have put my Jesus hat back on. So first of all, when I debated Seitan Bruggencate, he said something that people laughed at and mocked, but he was correct. And he made an argument essentially that says, if the Quran is true, it affirms the Bible and that makes the Bible true. But if the Bible's true, then the Quran must be false. And similarly, the question from Alex, or that you projected from Alex, I haven't seen it. I don't know what he said. But if Mormonism has these testimonies, why don't you believe Mormonism? It's because Mormonism is a derivative of Christianity. And I don't believe Christianity merely based on those things. I merely presented those things. But if Christianity is true, Mormonism has to be false. And so if two things, even if they have the same evidence, the same testimonial evidence and supporting evidence, if they're in conflict, one of them must be wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it could just be as simple as, I'm deciding to go with the first one. And maybe that's irrational, but if you're going to, I get what Alex is doing or what you're saying he did. And it's fine to say, you dismiss these other religions that have similar evidence to what you presented for yours. And that's perfectly acceptable. The problem is, for the believer, it's not going to be compelling or convincing because they know that there's additional evidence, which is that Reformed Egyptian isn't a real language. Joseph Smith was a con man. If you stick your head in a hat and pretend to read a language that doesn't exist, you're a con man. And no matter how much testimonial evidence there is, that contradicts the foundations of Mormonism. Mormonism's bizarrely, ridiculously, I mean, the only religion I know of in modern world that is more obviously false and ridiculous than Mormonism is Scientology. And both of them.
I was going to say, what about Pastafarianism?
Pastafarianism isn't a real religion. It's a.
I know. I'm kidding.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because somebody might think it is. So.
No, I'm just joking. And yeah, I mean, I agree. And the reason why I brought those claims up to my fundamentalist friends is because it feels like at a certain point, their belief, they will sometimes divert to say, okay, well, but my belief is justified because of the personal experience I have. I've trusted God with my heart. These outcomes have happened, and that to me is my proof. But as we've as has been demonstrated in this call, that's not a demonstrable proof that other people can use. That's just a totally anecdotal, personal thing. So then it has to come down to historical accuracies, and there are plenty of other claims that are dismissed by most Christians that have just as much, if not more, supporting incredible seeming evidence that they just don't pay attention to. And it's a very frustrating point in the conversation to come to, because they will eventually seemingly just dismiss carte blanche a lot of these other things that have the evidence, while not also being able to see the reflection of why I was able to do that with Christianity, and if they can get to the point, it's like the one more God analogy. If you can get to the point where you're already dismissing all these other religions, then I'm just dismissing one more religion than you. And it feels like it'd be a pretty easy thing for you to also make the jump into dismissing this one more religion.
Well, if we know that somebody was murdered and we start dismissing candidates, if there's only one candidate left, should we dismiss that one too?
That's a fair point. I would say it depends on.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
It depends on the evidence. Yeah.
The nice thing is that we can never dismiss all the candidate options for something like that as a matter of practicality. But on this note, Clay, I appreciate the call and your insights onto this, and best of luck to you continuing on after deconverting. I'd love to talk to you more about it some other time. We got a few calls we want to try and get to before we get to Super Chats today, but yeah, nice talking with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jim.
Take care. Go get that baby some food or something.